inside every human being, there's a struggle. On one hand, we know what's good and we want to do it. We want to be spiritual. We desire to serve and cling to God, to make him smile, to show selfless love to others, and to experience holiness. On the other hand, we have an animalistic urge, a selfish impulse inside. We want to experience pleasure and avoid pain, even if that happens at the expense of others and in defiance of God. The Apostle Paul was startlingly frank about this inner battle when he talked about sin in Romans chapter 7, verse 15. He said, "For what I am doing, I do not understand, for I'm not practicing what I would like to do, but I am doing the very thing I hate." And then if we jump down to verses 22 and 23, he says, "I joyfully concur with the law of God in the inner man, but I see a different law in the members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin, which is in my members." Paul's describing for us a duality in the nature of human beings. In Jewish thought, we actually have names for each of these forces at work within a person. The good inclination and the evil inclination. Well, that's a common translation anyway. The Hebrew terms are Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer HaRa. Yetzer means formation, something formed, like a clay pot that a potter has made. HaTov means the good, and Hara means the bad. Evil might not actually be quite the right word, because the Ra is not the word for morally bad, only something that's flawed or harmful. Now, we have, each of us has these two components to our makeup, like a magnet with two poles, one oriented toward spirituality, the other oriented toward physicality. Now, the term Yetzer Hara, or evil inclination, actually comes from the book of Genesis in chapter 6, verse 5, where it says, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the heart, the thoughts of his heart, was only evil continually." Now, here the word intent is yetzer, or inclination, and the word translated evil is ra. But the problem that precipitated the flood was not that they had an evil inclination, but that every inclination was only evil. That is, humanity had become completely given over to the pursuit of physicality and self. They lacked a functional Yetzer HaTov, and as a result, they were incapable of pursuing God. Now notice how in this verse, the heart is the locus of thought. And this is important. In biblical symbolism, the heart doesn't represent emotions. The heart is where you think, process, decide. The heart is the mind. So just as a heart has multiple chambers, a person has two inclinations within his mind. Now, Yeshua may have been alluding to this idea when he taught in Luke chapter 6, verse 45, "The good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth what is evil, for his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart." In other words, you've got two treasuries in your heart, in your mind. Which one dictates your speech? And Yeshua often quoted Deuteronomy 6:5, a verse we all know very well, which tells us to love the Lord your God with all your heart. The ancient rabbis explained that verse to mean with both inclinations in your heart, the evil and the good, to love God. Now, however, keep in mind that the evil inclination is not really evil. It gives the humans the capability to do evil, but it's not evil on its own. God is the one who put it there, and it has an important function. It's what gives us a sense of self. It's the Yetzer Hara that allows us to see ourselves as a being that's distinct from God and from other people. And that's why when it dominates a person, it leads to an inflated ego, narcissism, selfishness, materialism, and competition. But the ancient rabbis say that if not for the evil inclination, humans would not build houses, we would not get married, we wouldn't have kids. This drive comes from our sense of self and a natural rivalry with others. As it says this in Ecclesiastes 4:4. I have seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor. And without the evil inclination, we'd also lack the capacity for free choice, because our will would be completely nullified to God's. But God wants us to have an evil inclination because he wants us to choose him freely. Now, this duality, which gives us free choice, is what separates humans from animals and from angels. Yeah. Animals have no ability to pursue spirituality. They have no good inclination, and that means they can't really be punished for committing sins. And angels, for the most part, have no distinct will. They have no evil inclination, and that means that they really can't be rewarded for their obedience. But God specifically crafted humans to have a perfect balance, a synthesis of both. And this enables us to do something that even an angel cannot do, to sanctify this physical world and to make it a home for God's presence, so that it would be, that God's kingdom would be on earth as it is in heaven. And that's our task. Not to eliminate the physical world, not to eliminate the evil inclination, but to overpower them, to conquer them, to tame them in the service of God. Now, one common analogy for our two inclinations is the horse and the wagon driver. A horse is a powerful animal, and when it's broken and when it's trained, it becomes an incredible resource for the rider or the wagon driver. And the same is true of the evil inclination. Once you've trained it, it can propel you and it can assist you in accomplishing your spiritual mission here on earth. Now, of course, sometimes that's easier said than done. Our evil inclination is going to fight back. But don't be embarrassed if you're having to struggle. Actually, the struggle is the reason that you were created. Judaism teaches that the further you progress in righteousness, the harder the struggle becomes. And defeating it is not a one-time event. It happens every day. So how do you conquer your evil inclination today? Here's some tips. Number one, ask God for help. Find a private place and speak to God out loud so your ears can hear what you're saying. And admit that you're struggling and ask him to help you conquer your evil inclination. Because without his help, it is impossible to conquer it. But Paul said in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. However, leaving it like that, leaving it up to our prayer, that would be relying on a miracle. We can't do that. We have to act. The sages recommend that when the Yetzer Hara acts up, you drag him to the study hall. Then you're going to gain strength by devoting yourself to learning and meditating on the words of Scripture. That's going to give your Yetzer Hatov a lot of strength. And by means of all the accountability partners that you have around you, all your good influences that are there studying with you, they're going to strengthen your good inclination. And you know what? That's one great thing about Torah Club. It's a place where disciples learn together, experience the Scriptures together, pray together, and can be involved in one another's lives. So I encourage you to lean into that and make Torah Club a place where your spirit is strengthened to serve God. Now, I want to bless every one of you, and myself included, that God would give us strength today and every day to subdue our evil inclination, to nullify our ego, to sanctify our flesh, and to cause it to serve him. And may we become more and more like Yeshua, the Messiah, who humbled himself and poured out himself even to the point of death, and whom God greatly exalted and gave the name above all names. I hope you have a wonderful discussion time with your club. Now, thanks for joining us for Portion Connections. Now may the grace of our Rabbi, Yeshua the Messiah, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Shalom.
Shalom, brother.
I have a couple of questions here. Now they're starting out with in the book of talking about the folly of or that folly is contagious, and just you got wisdom and you got folly, the polar opposites. And wisdom, of course, is doing things right, and folly, of course, is the other side of it, doing things wrong. And we'll get into some of that. The also with when he was talking about here the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Yom Tov also kind of fits in, and I think we will see that in this lesson. I think it's. Yeah, we're going to be talking about that on the focus number 2, blamelessness, and whether we're talking about tamim or tamor. Okay, so we'll explain a little bit of that too, in terms of because a lot of times things get translated in English as evil, and when in Hebrew it doesn't really mean evil; it means just not fit for service. Okay, and so we'll get into that. Okay, now talking about Noah, there's some questions that I have about Noah and his whole situation there, because we got all the generations. We talk about the generations from Adam down to Noah, and it's kind of interesting. These people lived so long that Noah's grandfather was, and Adam was still alive to know Noah's grandfather. Okay, did you ever think about that? And if they didn't skip generations in there, because the Bible does not, when it does genealogies, it's not always a one for one, because it may skip several generations and still be, they consider the son of so and so, because there may be some that they didn't get. Okay, so, but anyway, the question. Let me ask this question. Okay, what about the population of the earth? How did we get to Noah and having all the earth was evil, and every culture in the world, every ancient culture in the world has a flood story. That's
150 of them do. 150 do.
Yeah, well, every one of them that I know of, and that people go around and talk about it. Just about every known culture has some kind of a flood story, and so and they vary a great deal. The one in Australia is much different than the one in China, than the one in South America, and so forth and so on. So it's pretty ubiquitous throughout the world that there was a flood story, and so now there's also a theory that one guy said, well, the earth was formed, and the population, they didn't really move very far away from Mesopotamia, and that they were in an area that was pretty just enclosed, or where they're talking about is around the Black Sea area, which is kind of in a bowl if you looked at it. And
you talking about the supercontinent?
Something like that.
Asia.
Yeah, and so everybody was kind of in a place where, it's several 100,000 miles square, but it's just a small part of what we know as the world today. And then that was the bowl where the flood was, and from there all of the nations of the world dispersed at the Tower of Babel, and that's how they got their flood story. And so anyway, that's just one of the theories that people come up with, and and everybody on my Tuesday night class, they shot me down. They said, no, that's a crazy story that we can't go with. And so
I agree.
there you go. And so because the Bible does talk a lot of times, it says all the earth, and doesn't say everywhere. Well, I look at the earth and the geology of it, and I love geology, and I can say, that I think that there was a flood around the world. God just wiped. He wiped everything out. You know, this idea that it was localized to the Black Sea area, I go, meh. You know, I really don't agree with it, but it's a theory that people come up with sometimes, and you have to be able to draw conclusions of that. Now, the idea that okay, then after the flood, we're going to have one other thing that we're going to talk about population-wise after the flood. So, wicked and the righteous. It says Noah was a righteous man. What did that mean? How could he be a righteous man when we didn't have Torah? How would you know what was right and wrong if we didn't have the written Torah?
We needed God.
The Lord wrote upon the laws upon their hearts so they would have understanding.
Romans chapter 1, for since the beginning of the world, the invisible attributes, the divine nature in his, they are clearly being seen through what he's made.
Well, he gave everyone, somewhere people knew what was right and wrong. Cain and Abel, they knew what a correct sacrifice was, and Abel did the animal sacrifice like God had required, and Cain didn't. And why did Cain not do that?
Because he wasn't going to go to his little brother and get a goat.
No, because Cain wasn't able.
He missed that one.
And his wife probably reminded him too.
Okay. Okay. So the idea that they had somewhere along the line, and that's something that I teach a lot, is that God put on men's hearts what was right, what was wrong. And every culture has some kind of a moral compass that within their own culture they know what is right and what is wrong, or what we consider moral or what we consider immoral, or what we have a culture. If you travel to certain third world countries or just foreign countries, it can be totally different. For instance,
but is that with God's what He calls moral or not in these other countries that you say?
Well, I look at them, and I've seen other countries where the mode of dress, if you compare it with Western standards, would be completely, that's immoral. That those women are running around with nothing on top, or just almost nothing on bottom too. It just depends on the culture, because I've seen it where topless, but from here to there that's what you always covered. You never uncovered that. I've also seen in other places in the world where basically they would just wear a little string, a little G-string kind of a thing, and that was it. And that's their culture, and it was not immoral to them. Okay, and so we have those kinds of things. Certain parts of the world, you will eat certain things that we would not ever eat over here. The Aborigines in Australia, they eat things that we don't eat, because we would say that that's yucky to eat grubs, but that you roast them and they're kind of
Or monkey brains.
Oh, that's China. They say they eat everything on 4 legs but a chair.
Yeah. All right. I've never eaten monkey brains. Okay.
No, that's Falsey's
The
fault.
engineers at my company had to do it.
I've been in places where they did it, and I just refused to do it.
I
I'm just not going to eat monkey brains. Okay. Now,
So do the French.
frogs.
Frogs are good.
Yeah.
Frog legs.
Yeah.
And snails.
Tastes like chicken.
Well, so those are kind of things that we grew up in a different culture, what is right and what is wrong. So, or just a way of living. And so God does that. He gives us that, even that then in a moral thing that, you have well, for instance then, in the Eskimo culture of, maybe not so much today, but, years ago, their idea of monogamy was a little different than ours because it was
Only one at a time.
well, and that was it. Or if you had a visitor come, somebody come and visit your little igloo, then you would offer one of the females to him and to as a
No, that's not God's way.
Keep you warm.
well, it's just keeping him warm, I guess. I don't know, but that would have been as maybe as near as the 1800s, 1700s,
Right,
1800s, something like
I
that.
did not know that.
All right, so that's a difference in culture, and what we would say, yeah, now that's a moral thing for us,
Yeah.
And so, but in this world, though, in Noah's time, they said that all of their inclinations, all of their yetzer hara, their yetzer, okay, all of their whole mind and everything was always on evil. So it wasn't that they just thought about evil every once in a while.
No, they just never gave a thought to God.
They can totally shut God out of the school, huh?
How about the Noah's wife, sons, and sons' wives?
Okay, what about them?
About them, if they are not equal like the rest of the people, with the Jezera.
Where did they have the? Were they like the other people you're saying?
Because the Bible talk about Noah as a righteous man. But how about the rest
I
of
gotta
the
get
people
through here.
with the king?
He doesn't. They don't really say what about his children, but God, he raised them, and maybe God gave them, maybe God gave them a little bit of grace there because of their father, so that they would also survive the flood, and so they could repopulate.
It was like that, next generation coming, that means all of us are coming from Noah. That means at that point the people disappeared of the world. That means somebody has
Oh,
to
did
go.
it? Now listen. What
Wait a
about
minute.
the son? The son then that he displayed a little bit of evil inclination there.
The lie,
Yeah. So the evil didn't die out.
Read the
the
Hebrew.
rest of
He
the
was
people
naked.
have some customers because in that point the
Melanin tail.
didn't disappear.
M-A-L-A-N-I-E.
No, everybody.
Yeah, well,
We are here again.
Human nature did not disappear
M-E-L-A-N-I-E.
because all of the other people disappeared. Okay, you still had Yetzer Hara, you still had Yetzer Yom Tov, correct?
Wasn't there a verse that said something about like all flesh had become corrupted prior to the flood as well, if I recall?
I don't know. You'd have to. I'm not familiar with that,
Google
but take a look.
Okay, so question, contribution. The first question, the guy was talking about that angels does not have the evil inclination, they are incapable of doing evil. The question is, how did Lucifer?
Yeah, I didn't.
See,
quite-
I know, they have choice, but it's not.
And then, how was he able to convince, okay, if he was the only corrupt one, he was able to
A
convince
third of the
God
heavenly
of the
host.
heavens. So how did that happen if they could not even think of evil?
Yeah, I think you're right. I
Yeah,
think
that's a
that's flawed.
question for me to like. Then another thing is, are angels, okay, so if they have the ability to do evil, right now as we are, some angels are in heaven, can an angel just think, okay, I don't want to be an angel anymore, I want to go, like, is it possible, like, I want to join the devil's army, I don't know, is it possible?
It's so hard to fathom that, right?
Yeah.
You know, I don't agree with him that the angels had no capacity for evil, because obviously they did at some point. If not
Otherwise, that
evil,
wouldn't make sense, right?
yeah, so otherwise,
They-
the fall of
So-
Satan would not have
So
made
are
sense.
there two trees upstairs too?
Or probably are certain kind of angels.
What's that?
Probably are just certain kind of angels who has that ability.
I don't know. It's I don't know the answer to that, and I would say,
The worship leader went awry.
yeah. Okay.
Two things I want to say real quick. One was that I was going to use that same example, but for the other side of it, to say that Ham, did that terrible thing, but Shem and Japheth showed that they had not lost the ability for rightness in the way that they treated their father walking in backwards and stuff like that. So obviously, they were not as all of the other people because they obviously still had a sense of right and wrong because they the way they treated their father. Second thing on the angels, I believe that, you know, there was a war in heaven. We're not given much more detail than that because I think God considers it's not our business. It's not relevant to us in our situation. So he doesn't tell us all the details of that.
A lot of things we're not.
Need to know.
Right.
Yeah,
It's a need to know and we don't.
Tabitha, did you have?
Above our pay
As
grade.
far as they're talking about the inclination of like Noah and his sons and their wives and such like that. When I hear the verse that how God had repented that he had ever made humans, but then he saw Noah and Noah found grace in his eyes.
Yeah.
To me, I don't think that's necessarily so much as an upliftment of Noah's righteousness or his family's righteousness. They obviously would have still had some of that in evil inclination
humans,
because it
they're humans.
continued.
Yeah.
They weren't perfect.
After
They
faith.
weren't
But I think what that verse means, at least to me in my thought, is possibly when God saw Noah, he remembered that promise that he made. That was the grace that he saw in Noah, that he could not completely wipe out his the human race because that would be going against the own promise that he made to the human race.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know,
That
God
his
changed.
son would come through their seed. I mean, how is that gonna happen if he
Well,
destroyed them all?
and that was in Genesis 3:15.
Right.
The precursor of a Redeemer.
A
So,
whole lot of sinning is happening.
but God shows us a lot of grace in a lot of different ways. That's for sure. Okay. Now, a couple things that I'd underline here is that in the Bible, the wicked are not your everyday ordinary sinners. These are people who flagrantly, intentionally sinned in just about every way possible and without relief. I mean, they were just constantly sinning, you know, and they just never gave up on their sinning. So they were definitely evil people. And another sentence here that says, the wicked are wicked because they have no fear of God. Now, can you agree with that?
Yeah.
You know, if you don't have a fear of someone, then you're just not going to obey them. You know, I can think of all sorts of situations in my lifetime of, say military deal. If you had no fear of your superiors, you're liable to be kind of let's say a less than disciplined sailor or soldier. You know, and but if you did have fear of that chief petty officer, that master sergeant, sergeant major, that could stomp a hole in you and stomp it dry, then you're gonna act differently. Craig?
I typically refer to that as the law of tooth and nail. It's like they try to become the tooth and nail to either instill the fear or in the person who doesn't fear them.
Well, they could very well be. Could very well be. All right. So, why was it particularly difficult for Noah to be blameless in his generation? Why would you think it was particularly in Paula? You got to.
Well, everyone else was doing what they wanted to, and so it was difficult for
Kind of like how we grew up. Well, everybody's doing it,
Yeah.
aren't they? You know, that sort of thing. Yeah. So it's just one of those kind of things that it was difficult because everyone was evil, and I know.
And he was surrounded temptation after temptation.
Yeah, because I was thinking about it this morning. You know, the environment that you're in, a lot of times dictates how you act. I can just think. Carmen.
My brother has a saying, and I believe it's true. It's easier to come down to them
Yeah.
than it is to pull others up and you stay up there.
Bad
That's
company
hard.
corrupts good
You-
morals.
Which is why if you're in a marriage and one's a believer and one's not, the children invariably drift toward the one that's not.
That is true. That's
Which
why
is unfortunate, but true.
Unequally yoked.
Unequally yoked.
But I can tell you that, be just a matter of how I mean, the people that you're around, military for 26 years, and you around nasty talking people, it's very difficult not to kind of drift into that once in a while.
Yeah.
You're a poor
very
wife.
difficult.
You're a poor wife.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, she can tell you that. I'm not prone to that sort of thing, but
When you first met her, though, you were a little saltier, weren't you?
not terribly. Not when it concerned. Okay, yeah, maybe.
But you probably toned it down when you're around her, just because.
Oh, sure. I was
you know,
trying to be respectful
Exactly.
and so forth. But anyway, we're not talking about me.
Yeah,
Got him.
I don't know whether this is applicable, but with regards to evil, God judging men as evil. This verse is actually way heavily on it. It says Matthew 7:21 to 23. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you.
Get away from me.
Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness or evil.
Yeah.
So
Lawlessness is sin, yeah.
the picture that you see are people who are religious, people who speak the name of God, but his judgment is, I never knew you.
Yeah.
So I think we can even apply that to the people of Noah's time. People who think they were doing good. In fact, I think in the New Testament there's this verse that says, "Oh, they were giving their children to marriage. They were
Everyday life.
Everyday life. They were taking care of their families, but the only thing that was different was that they never knew him. And then I jumped to Hebrews 11:6, and 11:6 says, "Without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe
that he is,
and that he is a rewarder
for
of those who
follow.
seek him."
Amen.
That sort of like, it's not the dirty evil also that God judges us as evil. It's the seeming outward goodness, but what is lacking is our knowing him, is our connection with him, that he declares you as evil.
Well, every year on Yom Kippur, we confess our sin of commission and omission. You know, the things that we don't do that we know we shouldn't. Yes, sir.
Christopher online says, actually Noah was favored because he followed the ways of the commandments which he knew, and his sons were given wives prior to the flooding of the earth.
Okay, what commandments?
That's a good question. No, it's up to you. You got to tell us what commandments he followed.
Okay, well, it's my contention though that God did give instructions to people. He gave them. There's an oral Torah that he gave. Okay.
Sure.
Now,
And
at this
he
point,
had-
I'm going
he had
against.
clean animals too.
I'm going against my own the MJAA because they said, oh, there was no oral Torah. Had to be an oral Torah. You know, had to be.
How'd they get the 2 and 7 animals if there wasn't some sort of a...
God gave some instructions. Yeah.
How about the verse in Proverbs? The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
That's right.
I think what shows clearly is that Noah feared God, and that I think was the beginning of his wisdom,
Yeah.
his morality, his
And
whatever
somehow he
led
had
his life.
inside of him this consciousness of God, and that he was sensitive to it, he respected it, he feared it, and where everybody else just blew it off.
And God's law was.
What's interesting to me is the wives were allowed to come on there, so either he sanctified the 2 wives or the wives also followed. Or he wouldn't have allowed them into the boat.
Well, they were part of his plan though for replenishing the earth.
Yeah,
So
that's
I mean,
true.
there was.
But they wouldn't have been corrupt, and he would have, because that would.
No, if the wives were corrupt and immoral, I think he would have made another plan. Ben Blue and then
Yeah, I wanted to
Randy.
support contribute to what you said. So the evil, because even the Bible, after the times of Noah, going to the prophets, the Bible says that the heart of man is desperately wicked.
Right.
Like innately wicked.
We're not only commit sin,
Yes.
we are sin.
We are sin, like we are just even if you are doing good, you are still wicked.
Mhm.
And then into the New Testament, when they told Jesus, "Oh, you are good," he said, "No one is good." Don't,
What do you
don't
call
call
God?
me good.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one is good. And then in Romans it says, "No one is good. No, not one."
There you go.
God doesn't see us as good except until we accept Christ. And then the righteousness of Christ makes us good.
There you go.
Yeah, so we
The
are
Messiah.
Covered.
Yeah, we're covered because the fallen state of man makes us not good. Like
Okay.
even if you do good, that's why the Bible says the righteousness of the righteous
It says
are
filthy
filthy
rags.
rags.
Yeah.
So we can be doing good, but it doesn't buy God's favor as seeing
Amen,
us as
sister.
good.
There you go. Randy.
I think that in Noah's time before the flood, you also have to remember that Adam and Eve are still alive. You've got the original sinners there who got to have been telling their descendants that, we made the fatal mistake. Our kids paid that price. We've got to go forward, and they have this knowledge of this seed that's coming forth. So, there's something implanted, no pun intended,
Yeah.
there.
Sure.
Acknowledging there is a God and I'm not it.
Exceeding him.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
I'm the captain of my destiny. Me. No.
Okay.
And that's what it is. And you read this and you're going, sounds like nowadays, doesn't it? Each in their own little world.
We're never going to get past the first 2 or 3 years. Be
What are
quiet.
we gonna pay attention? He says, be quiet.
Okay. So I think we've kind of looked at this so far. All right. So we're talking about how would you consider yourself, evil or righteous?
Yes.
Righteous.
Ask my wife.
Wow. Righteous in Christ.
Only through the blood of Yeshua. Okay. That we're in ourselves are not. We cannot be.
We're not all that.
All right. Now, was Noah really blameless? Was he perfect?
No.
Neither
Okay.
was David, but he was the apple of God's eye.
Well, there you go. Okay, so a person, huh?
As soon Noah get out of the ark, he make a big mistake.
Well, sure. And it's kind of like, that prayer when you pray again. Okay, Lord, I just thank you for, that you blessed me and that I have not sinned.
And then
But I'm fixing to get out of bed, so I mean, here we go. So,
But I think,
huh? Go ahead, Carmen.
I think there's the difference is, are you seeking God all the time? You know you're gonna sin. You know that war, and sometimes you lose it. So do you go to God, I'm sorry, give me strength to do better, take that from me, that's not who I am, that's not who I wanna be. And that is the difference in evil, just doing it willfully, blatantly, thumbing your nose at God, or, oops,
Living in that state or
Constant prayer.
that mindset of repentance.
yes.
Okay, I jump.
I wanted to touch on the word faith. I want to go back to Cain and Abel. Both of them offered sacrifices. Right? The scripture recorded in Hebrews 11 that Abel, by faith, right?
Gave his best.
Okay. Now, the two of them gave sacrifice. But they said Abel by faith, which means this is like predestination. God has already put a mark on him. Just like in Noah by the offering.
But I think though Abel offered a more perfect sacrifice. Okay, because what did the Bible say? Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. Okay, and so they made a sacrifice somehow. And are there sacrifices that don't involve blood in the Jewish sacrificial system?
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are
Yeah, but
sacrifices
it's the
that.
first
Huh?
fruits, it's the first fruits that are the best, not
Well-
just some.
Well, but the idea is that there's nothing wrong with a sacrifice that does not involve blood.
That's right.
Okay, but it does not give you atonement. The only sacrifice that in the system
His blood.
that would make atonement would be the blood, the shed blood of an animal. So Abel offered that. Okay, and so what he was doing was he was making atonement for himself, and Cain said, well, I don't have to do atonement, an atonement sacrifice, because I'm not going to kill one of my animals. And so he was disobeying God at that point. So his faith was in, by faith, I'd say his faith was in what God told him to do, which was the blood of an animal. And Abel and Cain said, well, I don't need to do that. It's just, the animal died, the blood is red, I got lots of tomatoes over here, they're red, and so why not? And so and God didn't accept it. It was a defiant, I think a defiant sacrifice. Go ahead.
Just a question. Could it be possible that he said to his heart, I've no sin. I don't need,
I'm the cock of the walk. I'm the
I don't
firstborn.
have sin,
I'm the
so I
first-
don't
that
need
could
to
be.
sacrifice,
Could be.
to offer a blood sacrifice.
Yeah.
All right, there's a couple of things that I want to bring in here. The two terms, tamim and tahor. Now, if you look in page 8 under blameless, Hebrew word translated as blameless, tamim is the same word used to describe an animal fit for sacrifice as unblemished. Okay, it does not mean sinless.
Right.
Something that is tamim, and that is, you are fit for service, fit for a priest could be tamim, physically unblemished, but then possibly, well, he would have been. He would have still been a sinner. It's not that he was righteous per se, or sinless per
It's
se.
kind of like holy. You're set apart. You're either
Set aside, your side, okay? But at the same time, if that priest had somehow,
separated himself.
well, if he was captured by one of the enemies and was emasculated in some way or form, then he was no longer, even though he was a priest, he was no longer able to serve because he was not fit for service. You had to be without blemish.
He didn't
Okay.
meet the requirement.
He didn't meet the requirement. And he could still, like Daniel, people say that Daniel was a eunuch, but he was a godly man, but he could never be a priest. Okay? But he served God, and the Bible says, even and the Bible does talk about if you are a eunuch, if you serve the Lord, you'll be elevated above the others that are not, because you did take the effort to serve God, even though you were in a tahor, tamim. Tahor's good. Tamim is bad. Yeah, tamim is not fit. Okay. No, let's see. No, tamim is unblemished. Tahor is the other one. Yeah. All right. And so he would have been, even though he was tahor, he was not fit for service, and still be a righteous person. It doesn't. You don't have to be physically perfect.
But you do your right ear and your right thumb and your right toe.
Well, if you didn't have those, you wouldn't be perfect anyway.
Well, you couldn't get anointed.
Just like it took faith for Noah to believe God and start to act. Right? When when this ark rested, that was another test of faith when God asked him to get out of the ark. You know, he has a choice not to get out, not to come out of that ark. And what would have happened if he did not step out of that ark? He has a choice.
Well, he would have been in deep doo-doo, I mean, for one thing, but, you know, I mean, I think, at that point, remember that Noah was in that ark for 1 year. You know, it wasn't like, okay, we're gonna go for a little boat ride, a 3-hour tour, and then at the end of it, he just, okay, steps out. No, I mean, this was a catastrophic thing, and he ended up miles and miles away from where he started, because he's now in Turkey and not in Mesopotamia, where probably they started out at. You know, we don't know, but anyway, the idea that Noah was definitely, he was not sinless, he was not perfect, but he was fit for service. God saw in him goodness that would allow him then to serve the Lord, and so you know. And that's for us. I mean, that gives me hope that, you know, here we are. We're not perfect. But God is going to use us anyway. You know, and that's one of the good things about it is that I take encouragement from the Bible, and it's stories of imperfect people. God does use imperfect people to accomplish His purposes.
Yes, He does.
Okay, so. It's just that is good. Okay, now this idea that I talked about in the sermon this morning, walking with God. As Noah walked with God, and then, you know, Abraham, God says, "You walk ahead of me." But Noah walked with God. Enoch walked with God. Adam walked with God, and so it was a different kind of a relationship that they had that they did Abraham. All right, so in walking with God, we talk about halakha. Okay, everybody knows what halakha is. It's a manner of working out the Torah instructions. How do you carry out the Torah instructions? And so the idea of halakha is kind of walking with God. If you follow His instructions. Okay, and I don't know if I have to look in the back and see what kind of terms they have. Yeah, they got halakha. Okay, walk refers to how one should walk out God's commandments. And it's Jewish religious law. We have halakha, you know, traditions. We have all sorts of things like that. We have the old in the New Testament. The disciples wrote a book called the Didache, and the Didache was a instruction manual for the new Gentiles that are coming to faith in Yeshua. All right, it was a manual on, okay, how do you walk out all of these Jewish things that these Gentiles had no clue about? You know, it explained things like the feast to them. It explained the kosher laws a little bit to them. You remember, those of you that have been around a while noted that I taught the Didache in here for, I don't know, we went through the entire thing, I think, until COVID hit. We were about almost done, and then COVID hit, and then that was the end of it. Yeah.
That would have happened just before we showed up then in that case.
Yeah, well, and there's a book. You can buy the book. It's if you go through First Fruits of Zion, it's called The Way, but it's the Didache. Okay. And it's a very interesting book, and what it does, really, you know, people say, well, it's extra biblical. Well, yes, it is, but so are
so's the New Testament.
So is Matthew Henry's commentary. So is John MacDonald's commentaries. All those are.
Don't forget Schofield.
Or Schofield or Wesley, or, you know, any of those guys. It's a commentary. It's an instruction, and much of what's in the Didache are direct quotes from other parts of the Bible, so that we accept as canon. All right, now, what about the Sadducees?
They were sad.
Yeah, because, okay, they were sad because they didn't believe in the resurrection, so they were sad, you see. Okay, but the Sadducees,
We're doing every
they
joke
kept
today.
the Torah. They kept the strict word
There was no
of
love.
Torah.
Pharisees,
But
over yonder.
what? You're looking for why did I say
No, I said where, what page you on?
I'm on page 9. These are my own notes. I can make notes too, Carmen. Hey.
It's extra biblical going on.
No, I just want
It's extra lesson, not
the
extra.
idea of walking in with God or walking in Torah. You can do that and not have the love that goes along with it. Paul talked about that. That you can do all of these things in Torah, but if you don't have love, then it's nothing.
Right.
You know, you have absolutely
I need a
nothing.
symbol.
So the Sadducees were a prime example of that. The Pharisees, the Sadducees were a prime example. The Pharisees then were, they were pretty close too, because even though Yeshua was a Pharisee in his religious upbringing and so forth, and his school, he was of the school of Hillel, and but at the same time, he criticized the Pharisees roundly. I mean, called them a den of vipers and all sorts of things. Because why? They kept building those fences around the Torah, building and building to where the fences became more important than the Torah itself.
Right.
And they were losing sight of the fact of the spirit of the law that basically boiled down to loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and mind, and strength, and then loving your neighbor as yourself. They lost that to the point of counting all of the little tithes and their coming and the various mints and so forth that they would count and all of their little rules.
Goes back to that Matthew 7.
Yeah. And so we have, we have this today. Goodness sake! I mean, if you grew up in Judaism, we have whole bunches of rules.
Mm-hmm.
If you grew up in Pentecostalism, you had even more bunches of rules. You know, or any one of the Christian religions. Growing up as a kid, they said, "What do you believe in?" Well, we don't believe in this. We don't believe in that. We don't believe in. I couldn't tell them what I believed in, but I can sure tell you what we didn't believe in doing. You know, a kind of it was more on the negative side. You know, I could tell you what we didn't do, but I couldn't tell you what we did do. You know, and that was the whole bit of it. And so that's why I'm so happy that I'm out of that. And I can now, maybe it's just a case of being older and more educated. I can tell you what I believe in, but as a child I couldn't. I didn't. We didn't really. You were just taught what you couldn't do. Everything was negative. Don't do this, don't do that.
No makeup, no dance.
Don't have any fun. Because if you had any fun, that's got to be
It's probably sin, yeah.
Yeah, probably a sin. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, here a few months ago, this eminent scholar taught here about loving God, fearing God, and cleaving to God. You remember that? Huh? Anybody remember that one?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's what they're talking about here. The idea, if we're going to walk in God's ways, 3 obligations: you fear God, you love God, and you cling to God.
Cleave, yeah.
And cleave to God. Okay.
Not cleaver.
So, those are the 3 things. And so I don't know.
But this also, just like in Hebrew, the word cleave, that can be totally separate as well.
I said no cleaver.
It can be,
Sure.
but you cut off the dead weight, but it also can be.
Well, and you bring you cut away that which is not profitable to you. John, did you have a comment? No. Oh, okay.
I want to add Sunday worship, walking in God's way.
Is Sunday worship walking in God's way? Is Monday worship walking in God's way? How about Tuesday worship? Can I worship God on Tuesday?
You should be worshiping every day.
I take the weekdays off.
And that's
Got to have a holiday somewhere.
I want to worship one day, according to the scripture, the Holy Bible believe. There's only one day God. We can worship in any other day, but the appointed one day.
There's only one day. That's the Shabbat. That's Sabbath. It's not Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. So that's right. Those worshiping on Sunday, they're walking in God's way.
That's up to God. You know, I'm not gonna condemn Christians for worshiping God on Sunday, okay? They have their reasons, it's cultural, it's historical.
Mama told me.
Is it wrong for them to worship on Sunday? Absolutely not to worship on it. Are they wrong not to worship on Shabbat? Yeah. You know, yeah, that's the thing. See, they should be worshiping on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. But if they wanted to worship on Sunday too, the early believers did also. They made it a 2-day thing. Carmen?
Penalty
That's
of
what
the
I do now, I do it.
emperor will
But-
kill him.
Sure.
But that's not what I was gonna say. I was gonna say, but what about the scripture that says, one day is as any other day? Your festivals, your special days, your this.
Book of Hebrews.
Okay, well, that was in Galatians where Paul
Oh,
was
Galatians?
talking about.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry
Forgive me.
about, I mean, all of these different holidays and so forth. They're just one day is like another. But so don't get to the point where you're telling somebody that, you know, right now in the Messianic movement, and it aggravates the fire out of me. If you don't know, is people that say, when you celebrate Christmas, you must be a pagan and a sinner because you celebrate Christmas. What baloney, you know? And that's what I think
But
Paul
can
was saying.
that not fall on the, God said, worship on the seventh day, the seventh day, at the time
Well,
he
he said
said
set
that.
it apart. He didn't say.
Right.
What is worship? He just says don't do any work on that day.
But he didn't say anything in here about Saturday or Sunday.
The seventh day. But what is the seventh day? I mean,
Well,
Look at your
Where-
calendar, what's the seventh day?
In all history.
The Romans were right.
Have changed a lot,
I
and that's what
know,
you're
but I
getting at, right?
studied
Hold
all
on,
the
hold on.
calendars, and that's, it just went,
Wait, let me just finish. This calendars, this is what you're getting at, that the calendars have changed a lot over time. But throughout all of the changes, the week never has.
Yeah, because God said
Never.
the one, God has already calendared the
Yeah,
earth.
exactly.
The
Where did God
one
say
in
that?
Genesis chapter 1. The
People
one,
think it's
the
Monday.
two, the
Monday is
three,
not the
the
first day of the
four,
week.
the
where
Sunday.
did God
the
say that?
seven. That's the calendar we are following.
What scripture?
yeah, right.
He did.
The seventh day is still Saturday.
She had a question.
It's
Where
Saturday.
did God say
The
seven?
name Saturday is just a name that was come for the seventh day.
No,
But it does say the
what's your
seventh day.
question? Where's
The seventh day. Who made it
On a Saturday.
Saturday? Who made the first day Sunday? I mean, maybe the first day was
well,
Tuesday.
okay,
No.
let me put it in a different way. If you were speaking Portuguese, okay, they have
Or
okay,
Spanish.
or Spanish. They don't have. Well, no, Portuguese. So Spanish has domingo, lunes,
Sábado.
sábado, and all that.
Sábado.
That's where
But
it-
not
because
in
it's a
in
lunar
Portuguese.
calendar.
Portuguese has first day, second. Hebrew
Oh,
has
really?
first day, second day, third day, fourth day. You
Right,
know,
okay.
and Friday is Shmini, and so it's right. Okay, and so then you got, and then the seventh day is Shabbat. Okay, but they count the days. It's day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and day 6, and then Saturday is Shabbat. Okay, so it just depends on the language. And okay, now also there was a change there was a time in the Roman Empire where there were 10 days in a week.
Right.
Okay,
They-
so-
there was
But
a
what I'm
set of
saying
people
is
who tried
that's
it, but the
man
week still was
doing
never
that.
lost.
Huh?
That's man doing that.
Yes.
Right, but the
Okay.
week was never lost.
But God, I mean, the idea that we don't know, that we, the Jewish people do not know when Shabbat is, I'll poke you in the nose on
Yeah,
that. I mean, that's a
worship
trigger for me.
5,000
On a
years.
Saturday.
Huh?
5,000 years of using that.
Yes, and not only that, but how many hundreds of, not thousands, millions of us have been killed for keeping Shabbat.
Right.
And so you don't think that Jewish people don't know when the Shabbat
Yeah, you
is?
should
At
worship
least-
Shabbat. You know?
At least by Noah, by Moses, when they were commanded to keep the seventh day, we know at least by that point, you can argue maybe God lost before then, but you can't say that because at that point, obviously they knew which one the seventh day was, or God wouldn't have been telling them to keep the seventh day. And from the time of Moses to now, we can find calendars that correspond. The week has never been lost. The months have changed in different calendars. The years have changed in different calendars.
Right.
The week has never been lost. Seventh day, it still is the seventh day.
Yep.
And Seventh-day Adventists are totally relieved.
If you go
And by the
into
way, my training
the
is the seventh day Adventist.
okay, if you go into the rest of the booklet here, we're running out of time, but if you go into the rest of the booklet there, they can start getting into talking about the wisdom of Solomon and talking to the animals and talking to the animals' languages and all that.
Dr. Doolittle, all right.
That to me is Kabbalistic and it's mysticism and so they throw it in here because they do throw that kind of stuff in here and I just said I'm not going to spend time on it, okay? But
Dr. Doolittle used to be on the
it's just not something that I'm going to spend time on. Whether or not Solomon could speak the language of the animals, it's not that's speculation. Now the other thing, of course, that they talk about in the Tower of Babel, where people were confused, their languages were confused. Possibly, there are some that say that possibly that was the beginning of the different races. Up until that time, there were just one race of people that everybody kind of looked alike. Boring, but I mean, and there was one language. And when God dispersed people throughout the world and throughout the orb of, he made people look different, and so that they would be, not only did they have their language, but then they had their look about them, and so we see people from different parts of the world actually look different, than not better or not worse, just different.
Right.
And so and that makes some pretty good sense too. I mean, it's not something that I can really point to in the Bible, but I do know he confused the languages of people. And in Jewish thought, there were 70 nations, 70 people groups in the world. And so, of course, now we know we've got, 170 countries or something like that, but not 170
It's like
people
5,000 languages, distinct languages.
Well, and today there are, but
A lot of them are driven.
but they are. I mean, it was romance, the Romance language. That's divided into 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 now. But it's one language, and Chinese, 5 different dialects of Chinese, at least. And I couldn't even learn one of them when I was over there. It's just Chinese and me was it was all Greek to me. But you know what I'm talking about. There are distinct language groups and distinct people groups too, and that's just a good place that it would have happened there in the Tower of Babel. Okay, so Francie, you're
I was
that
just-
hand kind of sort of.
I was just gonna say that that's exactly why you have so many different creation and flood stories.
Yeah.
It's like the telephone game. You have all these people that grew up on the same thing and went diverse ways, and
Then they
their
get
stories
own.
change according to where they went.
Yeah.
It could be, yeah, absolutely. And how the people got from Mesopotamia to Australia, I have no clue. But if you travel the world, and last count I think, last count I think I've been to 76 countries. Okay, and it's interesting. One of the things that this 2-house group within the Messianic, I think it's just a false group, but anyway, their idea was that if you become a believer in Yeshua, then you must have Jewish blood in you, and so I tell you, you have never been to New Guinea, South Pacific, or so forth, and seen people over there that have isolated that group of people. There's not one single ounce of what we would call Jewish blood today. But it doesn't matter, because God said it doesn't matter.
Right.
We're all the same
Sons
to
of
Him
Abraham.
under the blood of Yeshua, and so it doesn't matter who we are, what we are, and we all came from Noah. You just have to kind of accept that fact.
And where did
That
Noah
is
come
a
from?
fact. What?
Adam and Eve.
And Adam and Eve, but they weren't Jews.
Okay.
They weren't Hebrews.
Neither
Huh?
was Noah.
Noah was not either. That's right. Noah was not a Jew. Okay?
Nope.
And, what about that? Yeshua was. But,
Yeah.
Noah was not a Jew. Okay, the Jewish people
Not till Abraham.
Not until Abraham. That was the beginning of it right there, the Hebrews, okay? And that's why,
But we
you were gonna say
have
something else, Randy?
blood.
Oh, I can't think of I can't see if the pencil is up there or she's just
No.
thinking.
Quit waving your pencil, come on, what's wrong? But you were talking about all the people and them split up. Well, in Revelation, there's that picture. Every nation, tribe, and tongue. Surrounding the Lord.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I can hardly wait. I mean, every nation, tribe, and tongue.
Exactly. So, guys, we're well over our time frame here today, and